On a cold Colorado morning, a woman drives through Daniels Park.
She was a foster parent, and she had several kids in the car. And she looked out, and it appeared to be a female body in the fields. She kept driving, and she saw a road worker pulled over and told him what she saw. And he decided to, get out of there and call law enforcement.
Douglas County officers did arrive. The investigators found a younger female, probably at that point late teens, early 20s, lying on her back.
You could see that there are two sets of footprints going in and only one set coming out. And they looked like they were like a boot, like a cowboy boot. So we now know that the crime scene occurred here because this person is walking. They're not being carried in and just dropped.
Police in nearby Englewood say a 21-year-old woman was reported missing the night before.
The Englewood Police Department had taken a missing persons report on January 16th. The person that they took a report on was Helene Przinski.
Helene went to high school in Hamilton, Massachusetts, a small town north of Boston.
She very much wanted to be part of the school and part of different organizations, very much into drama, very much into the school spirit. She was into poetry, she was into singing, she had a beautiful voice.
She was the youngest of 3 children, and her mom and dad, especially her dad, always called her baby.
As a college senior in 1979, she picked up and moved again, this time to Colorado, where she interned at a radio station.
It was a cold day, and it looked like it was going to snow. Helene came in the news booth and said, "It's starting to snow outside, and I'm a little concerned about my bus ride home." And she said, "Could I leave a little bit early if I need to?" I said, "If you'll wait 15 minutes, I'll give you a ride home." I said, "I'd feel a lot better if you let me take you home." And she thought about it for a minute, and she said, "No, I think I'll just ride the bus." So she left. I left the station that night to go home, which was about 6:15. The phone rang about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and it was Helene's aunt. And she said, "Helene has not come home yet. Do you know if she went someplace that I'm not aware of?" And I said, "No, she left the station right around 6 o'clock. Said she was going to catch the bus and go straight home."
My best friend was a captain, and he said, "We just had a call from Douglas County that they found a body of a young female, and they want you to go out and see if you can identify it." I just knew this had to be her. This was the only reported missing young female. I just sickened my stomach. I didn't want to go to the scene and identify the body, but didn't have any choice. We drove down to the location. I had to get out and walk out into the snowy field. But as soon as I got to the body, I knew it was her. I instantly knew it was her. It was the worst thing I ever had to do, and it's never left my mind.
The coroner identified that she had been stabbed 9 times in the back.
Cause of death was from loss of blood, and both of her lungs had collapsed.
The pathologist was able to confirm that she was sexually assaulted.
They were able to find some fluid, some dry fluid, could possibly be saliva or could be semen. So they took samples of it and they preserved it.
The way that she was murdered does give an indication that this is a crime of passion. And so that sometimes leads to an individual who might know her.
We were told that the brutality of the murder, it was with such rage that there was an opportunity for it to be someone that she knew. It seemed personal.
But she's brand new to town. She didn't have friends outside of the radio station.
I was contacted by several investigators after the day that Helene was found, and they wanted all the information I could give them about people that worked for me, people in the radio station, anybody she had come in contact with, or if there was anybody I thought that might want to harm her.
Her aunt and uncle They were the only people that she had. She had no one else in her sphere of interest other than what she had developed for a very short period of time of 2 weeks at her internship.
Unfortunately, nobody panned out.
We put out a $10,000 reward for any information. We ran stories on the air asking people to come forward.
A lady contacted law enforcement. She had saw a vehicle parked on the side of the road in the location that Helene's body was found. She saw a male suspect that appeared to be kneeling down by the rear of the vehicle and looked toward her, and the hazards were on.
Investigators used hypnosis and a crime scene sketch artist to develop a composite of a suspect that she thought she had seen.
They have a composite of this white male with, thick hair kind of parted to the side with the mustache, but it was aired and nothing ever came of it.
I made a promise to her parents that I would not rest until we found out who, why, how, and get the answers for them.
Anything new that happened in forensic science, anything new that happened in investigations, she was on top of it. She was searching it. She was trying to find an answer to whoever killed her friend Helene.
In 1980, that DNA wasn't useful. But decades later, investigators have new tools that might help identify Helene's killer.
We gave them DNA of our suspect to create from that genetic data a family tree.
Detectives build the branches of that tree using commercial genealogy sites like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. They simply run DNA from the crime scene through those sites, looking for anyone with even partial DNA matches based on centimorgans.
Centimorgans is a unit for measuring DNA. You and I may not be related at all, so there'd be no centimorgans. If you and I were siblings, it would be a very high number.
Investigators work on the DNA sample and the genealogy sites for weeks, and they finally get a promising lead.
We found who we thought was the mother of the person that did this horrible act in Douglas County. She was the mother of multiple kids, but the women could be thrown out right away. They didn't commit this crime because it was a male sample. It was a semen sample. But by all accounts and all records, she didn't have any boys.
When detectives question the woman's relatives, they get one step closer to the truth. They discover she'd given up 2 sons for adoption.
My genealogist and this detective dug deeper. And what they came up with was a very old newspaper article about a reunion between this woman and her son. And in that article, they mentioned another son. Now we knew she had 2 boys. We were able to eliminate one of the sons very quickly because his DNA was already in the CODIS DNA system and was no match. The younger brother that we focused on, his name was Curtis Allen White. Mr. White had committed a rape before 1980. He had gone to prison for that rape. In fact, he used a knife. This is long before DNA, so there was no DNA database for him to go into. He served a very short sentence for such a violent crime, and then he paroled to Colorado.
He was out here during the time that Helene came here in 1979 and was out here during the time that Helene would have been murdered. So now we're feeling like, okay, this could be our guy. We check his fingerprints and they come back to a guy named James Curtis Clanton down in Florida. So detectives follow up on that, and James Curtis Clanton is arrested in 1998 for domestic violence. And once they send the booking photo to us, When it was compared to the composite drawing that was given to us by a lady under hypnosis in 1980, were almost identical.
We talked about how I don't really care about stolen cars from 1980 in Colorado, but we do care about a young woman in Colorado in 1980. And we want to show you a picture of her and see if you recognize her.
Gotcha. I think I want to turn now.
You see him look at it, and his demeanor changed.
Investigators are now certain they are face to face with Helene's killer.
We actually do have a warrant for your arrest for first-degree murder and kidnapping.
For what?
First-degree murder and kidnapping of Helene.
You got the wrong guy.
We actually have your DNA in her and on her.
When the sergeant said your semen was found on her and in her, he kind of paused and just said, "Oh." I think that was a very pivotal moment in Mr. Clanton's heart.
So at this point, you are under arrest. We're going to be turning you over to the custody of the Union County Sheriff's Office at this point, where you'll be held without bond pending extradition.
Police arrest James Clanton on the spot. Police bring Clanton to Colorado to face murder charges. During the flight, he opens up about that night in 1980.
Do you remember what you were wearing?
No.
Would you have been wearing cowboy boots, shoes?
I'm sure I was wearing cowboy boots.
What made Helene the right target?
Faith.
He said he saw Helene stand up to get off the bus. He made a U-turn, and as she's crossing the street, he shows her the knife. She says, "I see it." He walks over, puts his arm around her and says, "Come with me," and ties her hands behind her back with the strap from her purse.
She didn't tell me about herself. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her that I was kidnapping her for money, and she said, "Well, my parents don't have any money," and stuff like that. I didn't tell her what I was really doing until we got in that woodshed.
We just talked about in 6 hours on a plane, I mean, anything and everything, and there was nothing that was off limits. And, one thing that we asked several times was, did you commit any other crimes? And did you commit any other sex assaults or rapes or murders or anything? And he was adamant that he didn't. He had in his mind that he was going to grab a girl and he was going to kidnap her and rape her. That was his plan.
It was a relief, but there's never closure on something that's so heinous like this.
James Clanton pleads guilty in a Colorado courtroom. 63-year-old Clanton is sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole after 20 years. It's the summer of 1974. John Wilson is 11 years old. His sister Elizabeth, 13.
So I went out into the middle of the parking lot and I heard my name. She called out my name, John. I turned around and looked and she was running my way.
John Wilson runs through the parking lot, ducks around the corner of a local high school, and waits for his sister.
I was gonna jump out and scare her and try to make a last-minute deal with her, not to tell Mom and Dad. And she never came by. Never came by.
With no sign of Liz, John runs the 4 blocks home and waits. The minutes turn into hours, and still Liz is a no-show. Officer Randy Politis catches the call.
We received a radio call on a missing child from the Prairie Village swimming pool parking lot.
Politis and a team of officers hit the streets.
Responded to the area and conducted a neighborhood canvass of all these homes and went door to door to see if anyone had seen the little girl.
After 5 hours, the search turns up no trace of Elizabeth and no reports of anyone or anything suspicious. Elizabeth Wilson was last seen alive running past a local high school. With nowhere else to turn, detectives returned to the school, and the only man working there at the time, a janitor named John Henry Horton.
He's a person of extreme interest at the time, given the extensive amount of door-to-door canvass and investigation that was being conducted, and no one else had seen any other person in the area, and he had the job to put him right there where she was last seen.
Horton's time card shows he punched out for a dinner break at 8 p.m. and didn't return until almost 11.
He clocked out about 20 minutes after Liz Wilson is last seen.
Well, that was the first serious red flag of the investigation, was the fact that he had not returned during that window of her disappearance.
According to the overnight janitor, when Horton returned to work, he was shirtless and had fresh scratches on his back and arms. When detectives questioned Horton about his absence from work, he claims he went out to buy dinner and had some car trouble.
His story is that his car broke down at a Milgram's grocery parking lot on 75th Street. We interviewed the employee there at the Milgram's, and this particular employee said there was nobody in that parking lot during that period of time.
Horton's shaky alibi raises enough suspicion to merit a search warrant. When detectives pop the trunk on Horton's car, they get an eyeful.
They pulled a lot of stuff out of the trunk of his car that was very questionable: sulfuric acid, chloroform, ether, butcher knife, some bags, and it just wasn't right, obviously.
We all know in police work that chloroform in a rag, you put it over someone's face, you can render them incapacitated very quickly. And at that time, I was very concerned about the fact that we had a possible homicide on our hands.
Horton tells police he stole the chloroform to get high, and the knife was a gift for his wife. Agents don't buy a word of his story. They have Horton pegged as a liar and a murderer. It's a theory that gets a boost when police talk to Beth Reichmeyer, a 15-year-old who describes an encounter she had with Horton on the same night Elizabeth disappeared.
I had been over playing tennis at Prairie Village Pool, and I was walking home, and on my way, a gentleman stopped me. He's standing right here. He wanted me to stand on his shoulders to help him turn off the water. He said he'd been watering the trees, and he needs me to stand on his shoulders to help him turn off the water. And that just didn't sound right to me.
Beth says she refused to help and walked on.
It was like yesterday.
When FBI agents revisit the school, they discover the water spigot is just 6 inches off the ground and suspect Horton was using that ruse to lure Beth into the school. In the weeks and months that follow, detectives pound the pavement, trying to forge a similar link between Horton and Liz Wilson. "9 miles from the spot where Elizabeth Wilson vanished is a vacant field. On January 7th, a construction worker named Fred Kipp surveys the land and turns up a skull. Agents recover the skull and some bones, but nothing further in the way of usable evidence. Dental records confirm the remains belong to 13-year-old Elizabeth Wilson. After 6 months, a family's worst fears become a reality. Cold case detectives begin the process of tracking down and re-interviewing witnesses.
Well, first I found a note on my door, and so I called them, and they said they're going to reopen the case.
In 1974, Beth Reichmeyer was just 15 years old when she told police that Horton approached her near the high school on the same night Liz disappeared. Now detectives return to Reichmeyer and ask her if she might have also seen Liz's brother John Wilson that night.
It was Horton first, and then as I got up around the front of the school, that's when John Wilson went running by. We were up towards the front of the doors, and he was out near the pillars.
Reichmeyer's statements put Horton that much closer to Liz Wilson and the time she disappeared. Captain Dan Meyer is a specialist in forensic mapping and lays out a timeline for cold case detectives.
Based on the evidence provided to me, I know that Beth is talking to John Horton and identifies the time of that encounter at 7:20 p.m. I then calculated the time that it would have taken them to reach the front door, and I know that Beth arrives at the front door of the school at 7:22. It's during that time that she sees young John Wilson run by her location. Based on my calculations, I know that just seconds prior to the 7:22 time, John had turned and saw his sister while she was continuing to run from this location. The final location that he saw his sister was only 175 feet, 13 to 17 seconds away from the location that John Horton was last seen, meaning he was the only one that had the opportunity for the abduction and was in the area at the time.
Why it happened, how it happened.
Horton agrees to sit down for questioning. For 2 hours, Courts digs, but Horton sticks to his denials and admits to nothing. Cold case detectives believe their case is as good as it's going to get and prepare to take their evidence to the DA. Then, another woman surfaces. Joy tells Agent Wilson that 2 months before Elizabeth disappeared, her neighbor, John Horton, offered to get her high. Krieger at the time was 14 years old.
So we were just going to go to the golf course for what I thought was just smoke pot and get high. Walked over to a green, kind of sat down, like a little circle area, and he pulls out this bottle and a rag and kind of says, here, you know, this will get you high. And I went like this, because that's what he told me to do, and I was like, no. And he said, no, go ahead, and I remember him putting his hand back up to mine.
Joy inhaled the fumes and quickly blacked out. Sometime later, she woke up in a haze.
I couldn't move at all, none whatsoever. But when I came to, it was like a foggy vision. But it's like I couldn't move, I couldn't say anything.
Before she could do anything to stop Horton, Joy blacked out for a second time.
I have no idea how I came to, but when I did, my pants were being pulled up and zipped. I kind of went out again. When I came to again, I remember sitting up and just violently throwing up.
Joy found her way home and made a promise to herself that she would never tell a soul.
She was very upset by it and explained to us that we were the first people she'd ever told about this.
Detectives believe the attack on Krieger to be a blueprint for Horton's abduction of Elizabeth Wilson and the final piece in their case against him. On October 15, 2003, Horton is arrested and charged with the murder of Elizabeth Wilson.
Our theory was that she was solicited by the defendant to come inside the school to turn off a water hose. He took her into a TV room inside the high school, had the chloroform with him at that time, had a knife with him at that time to threaten her in case she struggled or fought with him, and then he subdued her through the chloroform, rendered her unconscious, and then removed certain clothing for the purpose of fondling her. In the process of doing that, the chloroform, instead of rendering her unconscious, ended up killing her.
After 6 days of testimony, the case goes to the jury. Just 2 hours later, they are back with a verdict: guilty in the first degree.
The look on his face when they announced guilty, it was priceless, because he was stunned.
For the family of Elizabeth Wilson, the verdict means justice, 30 years in the making, and a small bit of comfort for a brother who wonders how different things might have been.
I often wonder how it would have been growing up with her in teenage years and getting old. But I'll see her again in heaven.
Just a few blocks from the ocean is a little 2-bedroom apartment, the new home for 25-year-old Corey Parker. On the day after Thanksgiving in 1998, one of Corey's co-workers stops by to check on her.
She didn't show up, which is definitely not like her. But he went and checked the windows at that point and did go to her bedroom window, and he was able to lift it a little bit. And he saw her foot covered in blood.
I was sitting at home on my off day, and I received a call from our dispatch that they needed for me to respond and assist on a homicide scene. I walked in. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. The first bedroom on the right was the victim's bedroom, and as you looked in, you could see a female body laying on the bed kind of scrunched up back in the corner, was totally covered in blood.
She had 101 stab wounds. The fatal wounds were in this area. She had one gaping wound on each side of her neck with multiple other stab wounds.
At autopsy, the medical examiner discovers that more than half of the wounds were inflicted after death.
It's almost like whoever's doing this is playing with the victim.
In 1998, Lou Iliopoulos is an investigator with the Duval County Medical Examiner. Although no semen is recovered from the body, Iliopoulos believes the postmortem mutilation speaks to a sexual motive. Iliopoulos tells detectives to look for someone with a history of sex crimes, perhaps someone in the neighborhood who knew Corey came home alone late at night. Back at the apartment, Jim Choate searches for trace evidence and finds what appears to be a strand of human hair near the victim's body. Then Choate moves to the suspected point of entry, an open kitchen window.
The windowsill, as you go out to the outside, had blood on it, on the outside of the windowsill. And it appeared like there was a small little area of blood in the kitchen cabinet area. The spot on the inside was probably the size of my fingertip, my little fingertip. The outside was just like somebody had actually taken their fingers in blood and just placed them down.
Choate scrapes the blood and sends it to the state crime lab. Initial tests indicate that the blood does not belong to Corey Parker. While a full DNA profile is being worked up, detectives hit the streets, looking for someone who wanted Corey Parker dead.
We decided to put a poster together and also conduct some news interviews to possibly elicit some information from the public.
The posters go up. A media blitz ensues.
Shocking new details.
And the plan works. A local woman named Julie Sedgwick walks into the office of Assistant State Attorney Angela Corey.
I mean, we didn't know if he had done it or not. We just thought we had information that could be pertinent.
He is Robert Eric Denny, an ex-dishwasher at the restaurant where Julie Sedgwick worked. In the days after the murder, Denny was often absent, and then suddenly skipped town. The DA's office does a little checking and begins to connect the dots between Robert Denny and Corey Parker.
We start learning that he had lived in the apartment directly behind her and had the clearest view because his bedroom looked right down onto Corey's apartment. I don't think you ever overlook the physical evidence.
The DA assembles a team of investigators to background Denny.
That was one of the initial things that we had for a red flag.
They get some of their best information from the suspect's sister.
She had kicked him out of her apartment because she woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and he was standing over her watching her sleep. And she just was creeped out over that.
In fact, the team learns that the Denny family is the picture of dysfunction.
Trial. She said, yeah, she had another brother that had stabbed a woman to death in Texas at the age of 15. He was serving a life sentence in Texas for that murder.
He was a newspaper boy and had gone in to collect money. And as the young lady, and I think she was like 27, as she turned around to get her money, she turned back around and he just started stabbing her for no reasons. I think he stabbed her 106 times, Billy?
It was 97 times, and when she went to get her purse to get her money to pay him for the paper money that she owed him, he locked the door behind him and turned and attacked her and killed her.
And Billy had said that was his greatest hero. Robert, growing up, was his greatest hero. And so now it started to make sense in terms of the stab wounds, the multiple stab wounds, and drawing that, maybe this was something trying to imitate his brother.
Hey, have you ever...
The theory plays well in a police bull session and gets the investigative juices flowing.
We agreed that this was a viable suspect, the fact that we had physical evidence for comparison. We needed to make a plan to go after Robert Denny.
Denny now lives in a small town in Maryland. Before the Florida detectives book a flight, there's one more thing they need to do.
We want to formulate some type of a plan that will allow us to get his DNA without him knowing that he's a suspect in the murder case that we know about him in Jacksonville.
The team's plan is ambitious. They make up a story about a fictitious crime spree and bring Denny in for questioning. Secure in the knowledge he is innocent, Denny should be at ease, and police hope willing to provide a sample of his DNA. Robert Denny is given the once-over by detectives, then asked to provide a saliva sample for DNA testing.
Well, with that, you could start to see the body language. When they started mentioning DNA, he just started crossing his arms and backing away from the investigator.
Denny declines to give a sample for DNA testing. In a parking lot behind a strip mall, cold case detectives watch a 19-year-old murder suspect on a smoke break.
He was kind of on edge and stuff like that. He would come out, to the place just behind us, smoking cigarettes and pacing back and forth, looking over his shoulder.
The next day, a team of detectives again trails Denny around town. This time, however, the suspect makes a mistake, and the detective's luck takes a turn for the better.
We noticed he was very nervous, and one of the investigators in the surveillance van noticed through a pair of binoculars that Robert Denny was spitting on the ground. And in fact, we recorded that he spit 6 or 7 times and noted the location where the spit fell.
Everybody was so excited and happy that he made such a blunder
After
we couldn't wait till he pulled out.
It just seems awfully funny that, or not funny, but kind of odd that at the end of the day, for him to come out and do that, it was almost like a godsend.
Robert Eric Denny's spit may very well hold the key to a cold case of murder. It is swabbed off the pavement, packaged, and sent to a DNA lab for testing.
And basically, I just obtained a full DNA profile that matched Eric Denny for every DNA location that we test for.
The blood match is confirmed when hair samples found at the scene are also genetically linked to Denny. Detectives want to arrest the suspect immediately. Assistant State Attorney Angela Corey tells them to wait.
I said, "You're not getting a warrant," and they wanted one desperately. And I said, "We're not doing a warrant until you get a denial from Robert Denny."
Corey wants a statement from Robert Denny. Ideally, one where he denies knowing Corey Parker or ever being in her apartment. There's one problem: how to get Robert Denny, a young man very much on edge, to open up and talk.
We didn't want to scare him. We didn't want Joe Friday to go on his door, knock on his door.
The cold case team doesn't want Joe Friday. Instead, they send in a female version of Columbo.
Hi, Robert Denny. My name's Katie Kingston. Okay. How to do? This will only take a couple of minutes. I need to run a couple questions by you.
Detective Katie Kingston puts on a wire and knocks on the door of a 2-story house in the suburbs. It's where 19-year-old Robert Denny lives with a 49-year-old woman he met on the internet.
I decided that I was going to be a person that was a silly type Southern female who just had little odd and end jobs to do in the detective division.
Do you know Corey Parker or ever talk to her? Show picture. That's Corey Parker. No. Did you ever go to her apartment? You never went to her apartment? No.
I could hardly contain myself. I was thrilled because I knew that that was going to nail it for us.
Kingston's play dumb routine works, as Denny's statement gives him no way to explain away his DNA found inside Corey Parker's apartment. 3 hours after Kingston leaves, police return to the suspect's home, this time with an arrest warrant.
Robert, what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to advise you of your constitutional rights, okay? Listen to me. Are you able?
Please, give me a second.
Okay, sure. Take
Sorry,
it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Inside a police squad room, Robert Denny's world begins to crumble. The state's case rests mainly on DNA evidence. Blood in the victim's kitchen matches Robert Denny, as do hairs found on Corey Parker's body.
I've been doing murder cases for a long time. I don't see a 17-year-old boy who no witness ever suggested the two of them had exchanged so much as a hi, or how are you, getting up in the middle of the night, going next door and finding unerringly the only unlocked window in the neighbor's apartment, crawling in and stabbing this person 101 times.
In the third week of his trial, the defendant takes the stand.
Miss Corey, I didn't kill Corey Parker.
How did your forcibly removed hair get on her bloody, rolled up underwear next to her body?
I don't know.
Never denied it was his DNA, and on cross-examination, never came up with an explanation for it. His exact words were, "I don't know." In fact, I think I called him Mr. I Don't Know in my closing argument.
On April 28th, the jury is sequestered in a conference room to decide Robert Denny's fate.
Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. We, the jury, further find that the killing was done with premeditation.
Robert Denny is sentenced to life in a Florida prison without the possibility of parole. On October 17th, 1982, Michelle Basil is 13 years old and at home when the phone rings. At the other end of the line, her sister Kim.
And she just said that she was in trouble and she needed to come home. She was standing in the shower, so no one would know she was on the phone.
Kim Basil's family has not heard from her for several days before Michelle can question Kim as to why the conversation is cut short.
And then someone came in and found out she was on the phone, and they started to violently beat her. And the phone dropped, but it didn't disconnect. And then they started burning her with cigarettes. I could hear it, begging them to stop burning her. I just listened as long as I could, and then finally someone hung the phone up.
In 1982, Michelle is barely a teenager and badly frightened. She tells her mother about the phone call and about Kim.
I contacted the police and they told me I had to wait the 2 weeks to file a missing person. They considered her a 19-year-old runaway. She was an adult until they had something proving that she was gone. It really was very little investigation.
Runaway or murder victim, the fact is Kim Basil has disappeared and is still missing a year later, when a local drug sting produces an arrest and then an informant.
This person had heard that Kim had been killed and went on to tell me that Esther Benita Cahoot and John Santmeyer were two of the people that were involved in killing Kim. The group that we're talking about, the older participants, were constantly setting up crimes, using younger people so that if someone got caught, it wouldn't lead to their arrest. They were very good at it. These families were infamous since the first day I came on the police bureau in the late 60s. It's just a way of life with them.
According to Goodale's informant, at the time she disappeared, Kim Basil was Danny Longoria's girlfriend and had been used by the family in a massive shoplifting scam.
I think at one point during this investigation, the store informed me that they believe they may have lost up to $250,000 worth of merchandise before they had figured this out. They set up a surveillance with video surveillance and captured this on film.
Caught by security cameras, Kim Basil was looking at possible jail time, and according to the informant, reportedly asked the Longoria family for protection.
She told them, "You need to help me, and if you don't, I'm going to go to the police and I'm going to tell them about your cocaine trafficking, the safe burglary, and these thefts from Fred Meyer." Wrong thing to say to these people. We knew she was with some very bad people and young and somewhat naive and probably in over her head.
Goodale believes the family viewed Kim Basil as a potential informant and decided to get rid of her. In November of 1983, he sits down with Linda Estes, a detective from neighboring Clackamas County, and a woman familiar with the Longoria family. Estes and Goodale decide to approach Danny Longoria and see if he will roll over on his cousin Esther or his crony John. It's something the Longoria family is famous for.
They like to tape record other criminals and use that for barter should they ever be arrested. And instead of going to jail, they wanted to trade something.
Danny Longoria does not disappoint. The moment he hears the name Kim Bezel, Longoria proclaims his innocence. In the next breath, he agrees to a police wiretap.
He agreed to make some tape-recorded phone calls to the suspects in the case and to any witnesses in the case that might have information.
Longoria first calls on Esther Cahoot.
Lawyer said that you said that I killed that broad and that you had the police
That's
believed
a story. That's a story, swear to God. That's an absolutely made-up story. You have nothing to worry about. You did absolutely nothing. I mean, I had no contact with you or nothing.
That's not the point. I don't want them to put a bum beef on me, man.
Esther isn't talking, even to her cousin Danny. Then more stories begin to surface about Kim Bezel and a wood chipper.
We heard rumors on the street that her body had been run through a wood chipper.
Joe Goodell and I did some follow-up investigation in regards to that.
And interviewed the owner of this wood chipper and looked over the grounds. And I mean, I could envision finding pieces of body parts that have been through a chipper out here. We never did, thank goodness.
Fargo Revisited never gets a chance to play in the Great Northwest. Instead, Goodale and Estes come up with exactly nothing. No body, no evidence, and no one in the family willing to talk. At least, not yet. On a winter afternoon, Detective Gary Muncie sits across from John Santmeyer, an alleged member of the Longoria crime family, now sitting in jail on a probation violation. Santmeyer has asked for the meeting and wants to talk about the 1982 murder of 19-year-old Kim Bezel.
There's perhaps a crack in the foundation of this group of people, and he was privy to that, and he wanted to get his word in first, probably to benefit himself.
What I do remember, the night, I'm not sure of the night that it was, I was awakened by Esther.
Esther is Esther Cahoot, Danny Longoria's cousin and second in command in the Longoria operation. John Santmeyer lives with Esther and her 3 sons.
She had asked me to help move the body, for which she had already called her brother and her son, which is Roy and John, and she had showed me the body, for which down toward the lower part of the body, which would have been groin area, was a big wet spot to where I automatically assumed that she was dead already.
He said that Esther, Roy, John, and himself had carried her out of the house in the sleeping bag, stepping over other kids that were asleep on the floor, out through the garage, into the back of the pickup truck, and that Roy and John left in that truck with the body in the back of the truck.
And from there, I had went back to sleep, and that was that.
Muncie isn't buying Santmeyer's limited role in the crime, but before he can charge anyone, he'll need more evidence, including a body. 2 weeks later, detectives forge a second crack in the Longoria family. This time, it's Esther Cahoot's nephew, Benny Manaz, who is arrested on a charge of attempted murder and seems more than willing to trade in his aunt for a deal from the DA.
When Benny came forward, it really enlightened me a little bit, because what he was telling us was about this property that his aunt owned, and that through the years he heard rumors of a young girl that was murdered and put in the property somewhere.
I heard him talking to somebody on the phone about property up in Friend that my mom and dad was selling. That's how I knew that she was going to be moved up to there. I was the one that dug that hole.
Did you dig it for this reason?
No.
Why'd you dig it?
For an outhouse. I thought that it was going to be used for a grave.
And Benny drew a map to the location where he believed the body was.
The land Benny describes is in a remote area outside Portland. Gates procures a search warrant and heads out, looking for the body of Kim Bezel.
We knew from the very beginning that Kimmy was in a sleeping bag. and we cut just a corner of the bag and saw what appeared to be a human bone.
Dental records prove that the body is that of Kim Basil. It is left to Michael Gates to contact the victim's family and let them know, after 16 years, what happened to Kim.
There were several people that we talked to that felt that they would end up the same way as Kimmy did if they talked.
When Mike first came up and spoke to me, I was in this mentality to where you're not supposed to talk to police officers, you're not supposed to say nothing no matter what.
Frank is a cousin in the Longoria family and just out on bail when Michael Gates approaches him.
He asked me if he could talk to his girlfriend and get back to me.
I go home and I speak with my wife and we start talking and she tells me to do what he thinks right.
And the next day I went back and he wanted to sit down and interview with me. And I taped the interview.
I was drinking with this associate, John Satmeyer, and he was a little intoxicated and he started talking about how he smothered her.
He says, I smothered her with a pillow on a couch.
When you say her, how did you know it was Kim?
He said her name. He said that he smothered Kim on the couch of my aunt's home and that she was fighting for air and he said he took her to the mountains and put her in a pre-dug hole.
Frankie was another piece of the puzzle. He was polygraphed as to what John Satmeyer talked to him about, and he passed with flying colors.
On March 19th, 2000, John Satmeyer is arrested for the murder of Kim Basil. Gates, however, is not yet satisfied. He believes Esther Cahoot, second in command of the Longoria family, was intimately involved in the crime.
I wanted anybody that was involved in this case in prison, and we knew she was involved. I just couldn't prove it at the time.
Inside the county jail, investigators turned the screws on John Satmeyer. Police believe Satmeyer and Cahoot had beaten and tortured Kim for hours. According to Satmeyer, Kim was tied up in a sleeping bag when he and Esther decided to kill her.
Esther came up to me and said, "Hey, let's just do it this way." She's in the sleeping bag. She brought me into the front room, showed me Kim was in the sleeping bag, all zipped up. The only part that was shown was her head.
And he showed me how he held her down until Kimmy stopped struggling.
And there was such a struggle with it that during the portions of the time where Kim kept saying, "I won't tell, I won't tell, I won't tell," I said, "Esther, I can't do this." So we switched spots. And I didn't sit on her arms while Esther sat on her face with the pillow. I basically just grabbed around her so she couldn't move her arm.
And once she stopped struggling, they held it down for a couple more minutes to make sure she was dead.
Why did Esther want Kim dead?
To show off Danny online that, hey, when you know it's done, I can do this, hey.
Esther Cahoot is indicted for first-degree murder. She pleads guilty to manslaughter and is sentenced to 9 years. John Satmeyer pleads guilty to murder 1 and receives a sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Susie Hegemeyer has lived in Upland for 10 years and knows everyone on her block, including her newest neighbor, a senior with cash to burn named Jack Irwin. Susan likes Jack, but becomes concerned when 2 young women named Marcia Johnson and Judy Gellert move in with the old man.
And eventually they started calling him Dad. And it didn't take very long for them to infiltrate his lifestyle. One morning he called me over, I was leaving for work, and he said, "I want to tell you something." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Do you know the girls and I are going to be a family, and we all went to an attorney, and I put him on my trust."
Irwin has already sold the girls a cabin he owned in Mount Baldy, some 10 miles away. Now it appears the 2 women are in line to inherit everything. 1 week later, he disappears from Upland, and Susan Hegemeyer confronts the girls.
Dad took a trip. I said, "What do you mean he took a trip?" he took a trip. He wanted to go to Seattle. And I said, why Seattle? Oh, because he wanted to see the Space Needle. And I said, well, how long is he going to be? Oh, I don't know. Where is he going to stay? I don't know.
And I told her, I said, Jack would never do that. It's just not his personality.
2 weeks later, Jack Irwin is still nowhere to be found. Johnson and Gellert now split their time between Jack's home in Upland and his former cabin in Mount Baldy. The girls are the talk of the town up the mountain. Their sudden change in lifestyle does not escape notice.
All of a sudden they appear with all these marvelous vehicles. And the blonde one would drive the white Corvette. The brown-haired one had a Jeep. They had the biggest Ford-made SUV, Excursion, yeah. And then they had this bigger motorhome.
Within a few weeks, Irwin's friends are ready to go to the police.
And I happened to be at a luncheon with the district attorney at that time, Dennis Stout, and I had gotten information that he had just started up an elder abuse unit and had assigned several DA investigators to that unit.
DA investigator Maury Weiss is assigned the case. He believes Irwin has met with foul play, but has no body to prove up his theory. With no other leads to follow, Weiss takes a look at Irwin's bank account, which he discovers is emptying rapidly.
They had access to his bank account. They went to the bank. They were put on the signature card so they could withdraw money. Shortly after that time, Jack was never seen again.
As a trustee on Jack's account, Marcia Johnson has the authority to write and cash checks, almost all of them made out to herself.
The money was gone before the end of the year, about $77,000.
Weiss believes Johnson to be a con artist and perhaps a killer. It's a feeling that blossoms into outright suspicion when the investigator learns about a fire on Mount Baldy.
I was standing with my friend, and she yelled, "Jack's cabin is on fire."
Weiss suspects that the fire was set deliberately, not, however, to dispose of Jack Irwin's remains.
I thought it was mainly for the insurance money. Marcia had filed a claim for a burglary about a month prior to the fire and got some money that way. And it was just another way to get some more money, I believe.
In talking with the insurance investigator, Weiss gleans a juicy bit of gossip, not about the fire, but about Marcia Johnson's personal life. She is suing her former therapist for alleged sexual abuse.
She'd indicated that she had a sexual relationship with the therapist. And due to the statements Marcia made in regards to that, is why she ended up filing the suit.
If there are skeletons in Marcia Johnson's closet, Weiss figures they might surface in a contentious lawsuit. On August 28, 2002, he obtains depositions from the suit and begins to read.
As I started reading through the deposition, I realized that Ms. Martin had indicated under oath that Marcia Johnson admitted to her that she had killed Jack and dismembered his body and spread it around Mount Baldy.
According to the therapist's deposition, Marcia told her, "I shot him in the back of the neck." The therapist then said under oath, "I don't know if it was a saw or an axe, but she said she cut him up. She cut him into pieces."
That was the first information we had where Marcia had made any comments to anyone that we were aware of regarding the murder of Jack Irwin.
The lawyers involved in the civil suit never contacted police, and so a possible confession to murder was buried.
Two facts in this case we had to establish. A was this privileged communication between Marcia and a therapist, doctor-patient relationship, or was it between friends or lovers?
She said, "Debbie, I did kill Jack," and then the rest is in that deposition.
On September 30th, Elvert sits down with the therapist, who is more than willing to talk in detail about Johnson's alleged confession.
So I was sitting on the sofa, and she came over to the sofa, and she said something to the effect of, "Debbie, I did kill Jack." And I giggled because I thought she was teasing. I thought she was kidding.
And she established clearly that they were no longer doctor-patient relationship, and that she had stopped by, and it was during that evening that Marcia admitted to Deborah Martin that she in fact killed Jack Irwin.
She said that he was helping her either chop wood or move wood, and he turned around and called her dirty girl. And that made her very angry. So she went into the bathroom, and she said, she sat there and said something like, I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna kill him. And she went and got the gun, and she walked outside, and his back was toward her, and she said she like aimed, like put the gun up, and I shot him. She sawed him into pieces, took his body parts and sawed him into pieces and wrapped him in, and I forget if she said saran wrap or tinfoil, but I believe she said like saran wrap type thing, plastic wrap.
That's when Bobby made the comment that he felt a wiretap would be a good way to go with it.
The main thing is you cannot be charged with anything by association, Judy. Just because you knew me and I did things does not mean that you are going to get in any kind of trouble.
The tone of voice escalated. You could tell the panic was coming on them. They knew at that point that basically the case was made.
Marcia and Judy are scared and beginning to make mistakes. Just a few hours after the expedition is confiscated, Marcia puts a call in to her aunt.
Hello? Aunt Janie?
Yeah, hi, Marcia.
Hi, listen.
What? Are you okay?
No. It's all over. Everything's over. I just want you to do me one favor.
Everything's over. What do you mean?
I'm turning myself in for killing Jack.
Oh, no.
It's that they took the expedition. They confiscated that. They already know. They already know. They're building their case. It's over. Judy's been getting dragged through the mud, so I'm going to turn myself in.
Oh, no.
But you need to be there for Judy because she's going to need all the support she can get.
Marcia, we let her stay out for a few days after those initial statements regarding her involvement in the murder, until she went to a motel in El Cajon and decided to hide out there. And at that point, we felt that she might flee, and so we went down and effected an arrest at that point.
I don't know. I don't know what happened to me, but I shot him. Shot him in the back of the head. I think it hit him back here somewhere. I know it did, and I'm not a gunsmith or anything like that, but apparently I'm a pretty good shot. I was like, oh my God, what did I do? All of a sudden, I see his hand go up, and there was blood just squirting out. I mean, squirting out. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? So there was a chainsaw underneath the house, and this is really, really hard. I cut his head off. And then I cut both of his hands off with chainsaw, and then I cut both of his feet off. But when I cut his head off, I didn't realize how heavy a head is. It's really heavy.
That's pretty telling. If you experience that, you'll remember that. And she did.
I started disposing of his body. You know, I put his torso in one area. And his head, I took it out of the bag and I just watched it roll down his mouth. It was like, oh my God, I can't even believe this. I can't even believe this.
The interview wraps up at 4 a.m. with a promise from Marcia to take the detectives to the place on Mount Baldy where she disposed of Jack's body. When morning comes, however, Marcia has had a change of heart. Even without a body, Marcia's confession is enough to bring a charge of first-degree murder, and a trial date is set. Since Jack Irwin first disappeared, Johnson siphoned more than $100,000 from the senior's bank account, buying a Corvette, a Jeep, and an RV. As for Judy Gellert, cold case detectives cannot prove that she took part in the planning or execution of the murder.
She was a lot more culpable than I think the case proved against her.
Gellert pleads guilty to receiving stolen property and is sentenced to 5 years of probation.
I think they're the worst of all the culture we have out there of people preying on the innocent, so to speak. Here you have this elderly man that took them in off the street, and they repaid him by killing him and stealing everything he owned.
A man had called in on a cell phone stating that his wife and child had fallen off of a cliff. He went on to say that he didn't know if they were dead or not, but he could hear them gurgling.
The man on the phone identifies himself as Bob Duke, but cannot give Alvesteffer a good fix on his location. 40 minutes later, Alvesteffer finds Duke at the top of a cliff. In a heap on the rocks below lie Duke's wife, Leanna, and his 5-year-old son, Eric. Duke tells police the young family had chosen the cliff for their afternoon picnic.
His wife and child were out on the point. His child was chasing lizards. He had went back to his vehicle to get something to drink when he heard his wife yell his name. He went out onto the point and found them missing. He looked over the edge and saw the bodies.
The top of the cliff is flat and littered with broken rock. At the edge is a drop of more than 100 feet. Duke tells Alvesteffer he tried, but was unable to get down the cliff to check on his family. The Green River Fire Department is called to the scene. Unlike Bob Duke, they find the slope surrounding this particular cliff to be less than treacherous.
We went about 30, 40 yards north and walked down the hill to the victims. It wasn't real easy. It's pretty steep terrain, very rocky, a lot of loose rock, but it wasn't that difficult. We've dealt with worse.
All of the rescue personnel, however, have an uneasy feeling about the deaths of Leanna and Eric Duke. None of them are convinced it was an accident.
It just didn't seem right. The whole deal, the whole situation was not right in my mind.
Several things bother the crew. First, contrary to what Bob Duke claims, the cliff itself is not hard to negotiate. In fact, it only takes rescue workers a few minutes to walk to the bodies. Second, there is Duke's attitude at the scene. Not what you would expect from a man who has just seen his entire family killed at an afternoon picnic.
He seemed very nonchalant at the time. To begin with, I was attributing it toward shock, but the more conversation that I listened to him have with other people, it didn't sit right with me.
Beyond Duke himself is the cliff and its obvious dangers. Common sense tells the workers a mother would never take her child anywhere close to its edge. With no hard evidence of foul play, the deaths are ruled to be accidental. Bob Duke collects $60,000 in life insurance, and the case is closed before it ever gets a chance to go cold. The case stays closed for 2.5 years, until Bob Duke's best friend tells police of a conversation he once had with Duke. In the fall of 1998, Roger takes a call from his old friend. Bob Duke has a favor to ask.
He says, well, I want you to do something for me. Like, what are you talking about? He says, well, I want you to kill my parents. And he offered me 20 grand. He goes, I know you need the money, I'm giving you the first offer, the first shot at this. He goes, whether you do it or not, it will be done.
Roger should be surprised at Bob's offer, but he isn't. According to Brauberger, Bob Duke asked him to kill his wife and son 2.5 years earlier, in 1996, shortly before they fell to their deaths from a cliff in Wyoming.
He said, okay, how much is it going to cost? He goes, I'll give you 20 grand. He goes, I'll leave you 22 out behind the shed. We'll be barbecuing Thursday. Shoot me in the arm, try and miss the bone, shoot my wife and kid in the head and chest, and take out as many neighbor kids as you need to make it not look so isolated. And I told him, this is out of line, it's crazy. And then on the third and final time he offered me money to kill his wife and kid, I told him, you need to do yourself a favor and get a divorce. Because this is just unacceptable. You can't just go around killing people.
When Brauberger had first learned about the deaths of Leanna and Eric, he immediately suspected it was no accident. He did not, however, approach police or confront his friend.
If I went to the police, it would have been my word against his, and I would have been attacking, verbally attacking someone that just went through a personal tragedy, and he would have known that I suspected that he was behind it.
Now, 2.5 years later, Bob Duke is back and wants his parents dead. This time, Brauberger decides he needs to talk with someone. Roger Brauberger calls Mont Meekum, father of an old schoolmate and a lieutenant with the Green River Police Department. Brauberger tells Meekum about Bob Duke's plans for his parents and what Brauberger suspects about Duke's dead wife and child.
The thing that probably convinced me the most was his stage of panic. I mean, this was somebody that was in need of some help. And we walked him through the story for probably 2 hours. And anytime someone makes that type of an allegation, your next step is to get proof somehow.
Meekum sets up a phone sting and asks Brauberger to push for specifics on how Duke wants his parents killed. By the time they get Duke on the phone, his plans have changed. Now he asks Brauberger only to act as a lookout, while Duke himself shoots his parents in their home.
What was the plan then? As far as signal?
That's something, I don't know yet. It's going to depend, it might be something like, if the porch light is off, turn it on.
Okay.
I mean, something simple like that.
It isn't going to be loud, just going to wake the neighbors or nothing, is it?
No.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
The recording puts some substance behind Brauberger's story. Meekum puts in a call to the FBI, which agrees to get involved in the case. Todd Scott is a special agent with the Bureau. Scott doesn't have to dig very far to find a motive for murder. Since 1996, Bob Duke has lived off the insurance money from his wife and son's death. Now that money is gone. If his parents were dead, Bob Duke would stand to receive a fresh infusion of insurance cash. Scott and Meekum agree. The best way to build their case is with more specific admissions from the suspect himself. They set up a second phone sting, with Roger Brauberger now posing as an eager triggerman.
Remember when we talked before about the $20,000 for killing your parents?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm thinking I might want that.
Do it.
On January 8th, FBI agents burst into a home in Houston, Texas, and arrest Bob Duke for conspiring to kill his parents. 4 months later, he pleads guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and is sentenced to 10 years at a federal penitentiary. 2 potential murders have been prevented, but that still leaves Bob Duke's wife and son. Their deaths, long considered accidents, now appear to be nothing short of murder.
Well, I actually didn't think I could make a case, but considering the fact that Mr. Duke was probably lying about what happened at the scene, then we had a homicide.
After 16 months of legwork, their case against Bob Duke still lacks any hard forensic edge.
It was difficult. You'd always like to have some absolutely indisputable forensic evidence in any court case, and we had almost none.
The case against Bob Duke is not perfect, but as good as it's going to get, and in the eyes of investigators, well beyond any reasonable doubt. With indictments for murder in hand, the state prepares to try Duke for killing his wife and son. On August 12, 2002, Bob Duke's murder trial begins. The prosecution relies heavily on its star witness, Roger Brauberger, who recounts Duke's request that Brauberger kill his wife and son. The second major element in the state's case, the cliffs of the Flaming Gorge.
Any reasonable person who goes out there and looks at this crime scene is going to know that Leanna Duke, on her worst day, would not have allowed her son to get close enough to the edge of this cliff to fall off accidentally. And that's the case, right there.
On August 15th, the jury gets into a bus and drives out to the Flaming Gorge. One by one, they peer over the cliffs, down into a field of rocks that served as Leanna and Eric Duke's deathbed. 8 days later, they agree with Harold Moneyhun and return a verdict of murder in the first degree. Bob Duke is sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his wife and son, and the attempts to murder his parents. Detective John Lynch is looking for 3 people.
Mother and her 2 teenage daughters who had basically fallen off the face of the earth.
37-year-old Lucy Musino and her daughters Edith and Gabriella were reported missing by a friend the day after Thanksgiving.
And this was the last location that they were known to be at.
Detective Lynch enters Musino's apartment and finds it empty, except for a few small signs of foul play.
And checking the carpet, I noticed a brownish red, which potentially could have been blood. I then noticed around the baseboards, around the door, and the floorboard area, there were what appeared to be blood spatter marks.
Detectives saw or noticed a very large red-brown stain.
Steve Renteria is a criminalist with the LA County Crime Lab.
In the closet, they showed me a stain that pretty much took up the whole area of the interior of the closet.
Renteria runs chemical tests on the stain and determines it to be human blood.
After that, the detectives pointed out a certain area in this second bedroom. In this area here was the second stain, about 4 inches in diameter.
The second stain also tests positive for human blood. Renteria decides to coat the apartment with luminol.
We started in this bedroom and we sprayed the entire carpet area. Obviously, the area where there was blood gave a positive result, but then we started noticing a trail or a path about 2 feet wide that came from that blood stain through the doorway, a continuous reaction all the way down the hallway, and it looped around all the way back into the closet where the larger stain was located. My gut feeling is somebody probably bled out and somebody either had died or was near death, but without doing any scientific experiments as far as how much blood volume it would have to take to see that pattern, we weren't really able to say that to the detective, but inside I knew something bad had really happened.
We didn't really know if we had their true names.
Detective Lynch's missing persons case is beginning to look more and more like homicide, a matter further complicated by the fact that Lucy Musino and her daughters are undocumented aliens.
Again, no relatives on Luz's side at all. We found no one that was interested in these people besides their friends.
Lynch's only lead is Lucy's live-in boyfriend, Estanislao Gonzalez. At the time of the disappearance, Gonzalez was seen packing up and moving out of the apartment by the building manager.
She was real surprised by this because he had signed a year lease for this place, and less than a week later, he's moving out. So she asked him what was going on, and he said, well, we're not getting along, and she's going back to Mexico, and I'm leaving.
Detectives are unable to locate Gonzalez. In 1994, forensic technology cannot identify the blood found in the closet. And so the investigation hangs in limbo.
You have to prove that a crime has occurred, and we weren't able to show that from the blood that we had at the time and the technology at the time, we could only show that that was human blood. You know, we suspected who it belonged to, but you still have to prove it.
This is the cold case homicide room of the Downey Police Department.
Sergeant Jim Elsasser is closing in on retirement when he decides to take a shot at one of Downey PD's most puzzling cases. Like many in the department, Elsasser suspects Lucy Musino and her daughters are dead, and that the key to the case lies with Musino's boyfriend, Estanislao Gonzalez. By 1999, DNA technology is advancing rapidly and bringing detectives ever closer to identifying the blood found at the scene of the disappearance.
The results we got from bloodstain 1, which was from the closet, and bloodstain 2, which was from the bedroom number 2, told us that the 2 different bloodstains originated from 2 different individuals, that they were related to each other, and that they were from 2 females.
The blood of 2 related females, sisters perhaps, or a mother and daughter. The results are consistent with foul play and the disappearance of Lucy Musino and her daughters, but not specific enough to be conclusive.
So we wanted to try to identify them, and one way was to locate a relative that could provide us with some DNA through blood or saliva to compare with the blood we found in the apartment.
And what we learned after talking to the investigators, that there were two living children from the missing mother that were possibly with the suspect in Las Vegas.
The suspect in Las Vegas is Estanislao Gonzalez. Gonzalez fathered 2 of Musino's 4 children and abruptly skipped town with them when Lucy went missing.
And we told the detectives if they would be able to get a sample from those 2 living children, we would be able to compare the genetic profile from those children to the bloodstains found at the crime scene. And it would tell us, number one, if one of them could be the mother of the living children, and by default, the second stain would possibly be the daughter to that particular mother.
Downey detectives pack up and head for Vegas, gambling on a hunch that saliva samples from Lucy Musino's children will help unlock the mystery of her disappearance.
We came to the trailer and we decided to knock on the door and use a ruse that we were Child Protective Services.
Linda Turner is a detective in Las Vegas, called in by Downey PD to help make contact with Estanislao Gonzalez and his children.
He was very cooperative. He told us that we could look around his trailer, that we could talk to him, that we could talk to the kids.
And I began questioning him about the conditions of the mobile home, the children, whether they're attending school regularly. Normal questions that a social worker following up on something like this would normally ask.
The trailer was dirty. There was food, but it was very disorganized. There was dog feces inside the trailer.
I asked him, by the way, where's the mother of these children? And he appeared extremely startled.
And we asked them, where is your mother at? And I remember the twins just staring at us kind of blankly. They said they didn't have a mother.
2 weeks later, detectives reestablished contact with Gonzalez's children at a local Boys and Girls Club.
So we came here, told the twins we needed to do a health check on them. They remembered us. They were very cooperative, and we took 1 swab from the female and 1 swab from the male.
Back in LA County, Steve Renteria compares the children's DNA to profiles developed from the bloodstains found at the suspected crime scene.
What we found out was the DNA results from the 2 living children were consistent with being the natural children of the bloodstain we found in closet number 1. So by doing that, we were able to establish that that is where the mother bled out in that particular crime scene.
Cold case detectives believe they know where Lucy Musino died. Now they prepare to take down the man they suspect killed her. Detectives know Gonzalez is headed to the Boys and Girls Club to pick up his children, and that's where they plan to take him down.
Gonzalez walked out of the Boys and Girls Club with the twins. He walked towards his car. As soon as he got in the vicinity of his vehicle, we stopped him.
When I first mentioned to him that I wanted to talk to him about the disappearance of Lucy Musino, his jaw dropped and everything came tumbling down on him. He was very startled.
Detectives took him away across the parking lot to another vehicle, and my partner and I stayed with the twins as we already had a rapport with them. They were obviously upset seeing their dad being taken away. We stayed with them, comforted them.
Are you accusing me that I killed him? Or?
I'm accusing you of murder, Tony, and I want to know what happened.
I laid some things out to make him believe that we had a whole bunch of evidence that would implicate him in these murders.
And let me tell you something, you do a lot of things to a body. You burn it, dismember it, do all kinds of things to get rid of a body. But you know what? Tiny, minute particles of DNA will still be around. Even if you bury it. We find stuff like that all the time. Tony.
DNA. 3 little letters that appear to have a big impact on the suspect's demeanor.
We can prove it now.
Okay, now you can prove that I killed these people.
Yeah.
Did I did this with my own hands? Did I kill these people?
Yes, you're involved in their murders.
He stated, you think I killed them. You think I killed them? Well, he did that. He was motioning in a stabbing manner.
Or did I personally kill them?
You gonna answer, what's this?
With a knife or whatever?
Did you kill him with a knife?
Okay. With a gun? We don't know. Huh?
I don't know, I mean, you motioned like this, what does that mean?
Okay, I'm sorry for this, okay?
Why be
Next
sorry
time
for
I'm
it?
gonna go like this, and then you go like this. How about that?
You made the motion.
Okay.
right?
Okay. Well, we are talking about people being murdered.
People could be murdered all kinds of different ways.
I didn't kill them. I was not present when they were killed. I didn't witness anything. Okay. I only witnessed my kid.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm gonna tell you something.
Yes.
You are gonna be booked for a triple murder.
That's
You
fine.
were involved in
That's
it,
fine.
and we're gonna show it.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So we're gonna deal with
Do
it
it.
that way.
Do it.
You
Okay,
already
that's it.
basically
Do it. Okay.
confessed to this whole thing.
Confess.
Short of saying
I am-
you killed them, you moved them bodies. You were responsible
You are
for the
out of
bodies.
your way. You don't know
took
what you're
them out of
talking
there.
about.
You
And you're
dumped the
saying-
bodies in a riverbed, and you're trying to tell me you had nothing to do with it.
This guy is
My friend,
stupid.
you're done.
It's very
You're
stupid.
done.
Gonzalez is booked on the triple murder and enters a plea of innocent. As his trial date approaches, however, the suspect has a change of heart.
It was a death penalty type case, and his attorney approached this attorney's office, and eventually he confessed to these murders.
In a one-page statement, Stanislaw Gonzalez admits to the murders and to dumping the bodies in the Nevada desert.
I think that was the biggest surprise of the whole case was when we found out.
Details of Gonzalez's confession square with police department records of 3 Jane Does discovered on March 26, 1996.
The burial site
Is right here on this
Yeah.
corner.
Teeth and bone samples from the 3 Jane Does are tested and confirmed as belonging to Lucy Musino and her 2 daughters, Edith and Gabriela. Lucy Musino's surviving twins are currently living in a foster home in Las Vegas. As for their father, Stanislaw Gonzalez, he will be spending the rest of his life in a California prison. In 1992, Christine Perry's life is coming apart at the seams. Her husband, a deacon at the local church, is having an affair with a member of his congregation. Now Phil Perry wants a divorce.
I laid down and I couldn't even talk, and he just laid down next to me. There was a quiet resolution. It's over, it's done, it's done.
Phil Perry leaves the house the next morning. The day after that, Christine discovers her husband has vanished and talks to police.
The question specifically was, do you know where your husband is? Does he always tell you where he is? And I said, no, I don't always know. And the officer said, okay. That was enough. He got the message. He understood that things weren't okay.
Police generate a missing persons report. 3 days after Phil Perry is reported missing, Detective Emerson drives south to Tijuana. On a residential street, he finds an abandoned white Chrysler. In the back seat, the body of Phil Perry.
It appeared from the evidence that he had actually been pushed down and the gun went off or shot him in the back as he was being pushed down.
Emerson asks Customs to determine when Phil Perry's car crossed the border. He also requests that Customs check on 2 people who might want Phil Perry dead: his rumored lover, Lisa Bragg, and her husband, Carl. According to Customs, Carl Bragg's Jeep crossed the U.S.-Mexico border the day Phil Perry was reported missing. Emerson brings in Carl Bragg to ask him why.
And then he asked me a bunch of questions about, Phil Perry and Lisa, and did I know about his murder and his disappearance, and at that time I was saying no, I didn't know nothing.
Bragg's home and business are searched. Emerson finds a stash of love letters written from Phil Perry to Lisa Bragg. Carl admits to finding the letters and confronting his deacon about them.
Phil denied everything. Even when I told him I had the letters, he said, no, it's not what you think. It's a sisterly, brotherly love of Christ. It's not what you're thinking. You're thinking of the lust and the flesh. He says, and we got a spiritual love.
Carl, however, reads something different in the letters.
They mentioned that they were in a hotel room and they made love. It was in detailed. I was angry, I was hurt. Mainly more hurt than angry. I was hurt because I trusted this man a lot. Philip Perry and I were very close friends. He was like a spiritual advisor for me. I could talk to him about anything.
Emerson wants to charge Bragg with murder. However, he has a problem.
He had a bunch of alibis. Number one, he'd never been to Mexico in his life. Number two, he was busy that night.
Carl can prove he was at a hospital with a sick child the night Perry disappeared. Carl Bragg, it appears, could not have killed Phil Perry, unless, that is, he had help. Detective Emerson returns to the church parking lot where Phil Perry was last seen alive, and a story about a woman who claimed to have car trouble.
An unknown female, described as a short Hispanic female, needed a pair of jumper cables. Mr. Perry retrieved the jumper cables, went with her. She came back a short time later and delivered the jumper cables back. No one seemed to know the person. We asked the priest if he had ever seen her before. He stated that he had never seen her before, had no idea who she really was.
Emerson wonders if the woman might have acted as Carl Bragg's accomplice and somehow helped to kidnap Perry. It's a theory that goes nowhere for more than a decade until the mystery woman resurfaces with a vengeance. Liz Miner is Carl Bragg's stepsister. Liz feels the heat and begins to wilt just a bit. As police suspected, she did meet Phil Perry on the night he vanished. According to Liz, it was Carl Bragg who pushed her into the meeting.
Scott showed up at my house.
Scott Harrison.
Whatever his last name is.
Scott Harrison is a friend of Carl Bragg. According to Liz, she and Scott Harrison drove over to the church parking lot. There, Liz approached Phil Perry with a story about car trouble.
We were standing by my truck talking, and the next thing I know, Scott is standing next to Phil, and I jumped because I got scared because I didn't see him come out. And he told Phil to shut up, and he had a gun. Scott has some sort of tape or something, and he puts it over Phil's mouth, and he forces Phil in the back seat. Scott points the gun at me, and he says, "Get in the car." And then the next thing I know, I hear a loud bang in the car. My ears are hurting, and I go, and I jump, and he's all, "Just f***ing drive." And I'm like, what, and I'm shaking, and I don't know what to do, and I'm like, I need to go home.
She was done at that point. Stick a fork in her.
Liz Miner is booked on a charge of murder. Carl Bragg is now known as Carl D. Tommaso.
I did not kill him, and I'm not going to admit killing somebody when I didn't kill somebody.
What did you think was going to happen?
Them to scare him.
How were they going to scare him?
Scott was just supposed to tell him to stay away or else.
You already told me that you always know that Scott had a gun. So do you think he was probably going to bring that gun to scare too? Pretty safe assumption, right?
It's probably a safe assumption, but I don't think you'd ever,
I'm not saying you would know that he would do that. But,
I know for a fact Scott Harrison carried a gun with him at all times.
Okay.
Carl knew that he was armed and basically admitted that he sent an armed guy over to go slap somebody around.
But what you're telling me is realistically, honestly, is that you knew Scott was armed, or always armed, and you told him, go slap around Phil.
Mm-hmm. And this was a very crucial part of the investigation and in the case was finally he had admitted his involvement, that he, in fact, as we believed all along, has set this whole murder in motion.
Cold case detectives have the man they believe set up the hit on Deacon Perry and the woman who acted as bait. But what about the alleged trigger man, Scott Harrison?
When we first knocked at the door, he was pretty surprised. Initially, he said he didn't know anything about Perry's death and had never driven a man down to Mexico in the backseat of a Chrysler. But after a few minutes of thought and reflection and convincing from his wife, he decided to tell us a different story.
We are going to go to Mexico.
Who's driving what?
Carl and Bob are in the Jeep, and I'm in the white car.
Any problems at the border? Customs, U.S. guys, Mexican guys? Nothing. Other than your heart pounding in your chest?
Wishing I was somewhere else. All I saw was the body there.
Any blood?
Yeah, there was.
And you yourself didn't pull the trigger on that?
No.
For cold case detectives, the denial doesn't really matter. A murder charge is in Scott Harrison's future.
We filed murder charges and special circumstances of lying in wait and kidnapping against Carl DiTomaso and Scott Harrison and Elizabeth Minor.
In 2001, Mike Ramos is the DA assigned to the Perry murder. He focuses on Liz Minor, who cops a plea.
She pled guilty to manslaughter and kidnapping and went to prison for 11 years.
Carl Bragg DiTomaso opts for a trial.
I didn't want the man killed. I never ordered the man to be killed. I didn't kill him. I told somebody to go talk to him, not to kill him.
That is essentially DiTomaso's defense. The DA, however, tells a different story.
They parked in a dark area. Scott Harrison was hiding in a dark area. They brought the tape to put over his mouth. He had a gun with him. And when you bring those types of items to simply scare somebody, it doesn't make sense. No, they were there to lure him away and murder him.
A jury finds the state's case persuasive and finds Carl DiTomaso guilty of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 15 years to life. In July of 2005, Scott Harrison goes on trial. His defense attacks the credibility of two people who point the finger at Harrison, Carl DiTomaso and Liz Minor. The defense works, and Scott Harrison is acquitted. And he is innocent in the eyes of the law. 11 p.m., and the dark heart of winter comes calling, rolling up against the locked doors and windows of Columbus, Ohio. Inside a frame house, 23-year-old Christina Ruth hears a noise outside and opens her back door.
I went ahead and opened the door, and suddenly this person came into my doorway, and I went to shut the door, and he reached out and slammed the door open.
The man forces his way in, turns out the lights before Christina can get a look at him, and attacks.
We made it to the living room. It's where he had his hands around my neck, and he was choking me and was beating my head into the floor. And he kept saying he was going to kill me.
Christina Ruth has a choice to make and chooses life. She submits to her attacker, who begins to tear at her clothes. Meanwhile, Christina lets go of her physical being and retreats into her mind. After 3 hours, the rapist leaves. Christina dials 911 and is taken to the hospital where semen is collected. As Columbus police work the case, the victim braces for a long investigation.
And there just really wasn't much for them to go on. And I knew that even with DNA, it's just like a fingerprint. Unless you have a person to go with that, it doesn't help.
Within weeks, leads are run down and out, and the case goes cold. Meanwhile, a predator remains at large, walking the streets of Columbus, selecting the time and place for his next attack. In the 12 months since Christina Ruth's attack, 5 more women have been raped. Each attack centered in the Linden neighborhood of Columbus. Although the rapist tried to hide his face, some of the victims were able to provide the police with the beginnings of a description. Sketches are circulated, and residents warned to be on the lookout for a man now known as the Linden area rapist. Investigators believe their suspect will continue to hunt until he is caught. Investigators, however, are wrong. As in the fall of 1992, the attacks suddenly stopped. After nearly 2 years of terror, the streets of Columbus again grow quiet, and the community begins to relax just a bit.
I'm sleeping
And then the next thing I felt was someone leaning on the bed.
Just after 8 a.m., Yvonne Merle wakes to a stranger in her bed.
I was scared, and then he just threw me to my side real quick and told me not to look, and had a knife. And he was real close to me, his face was, and then he had a knife by my throat.
8.5 months pregnant, Yvonne begs for mercy, but finds none.
I did tell him, don't hurt. You know, I'm pregnant, please don't hurt the baby. And then he kneeled on the bed and pulled my underwear down, so then at that time I knew what he was gonna do. And I said, please, please, you know, I'm pregnant, you know, but he went ahead.
After the assault, the rapist walks out the back door, and Yvonne calls police. Detectives step up the investigation, releasing new sketches and ordering a heavier street presence for police. The Linden area rapist, however, continues to stalk and to hunt. 7 more women are assaulted in their homes, and detectives are still without a suspect. Original detectives had linked cases from 1991 through 1992, and a second set from 1994 and 1995, based on geographical proximity and MO. McKee believes the working theory to be sound and uses science to confirm it.
So we took the DNA from the first series and compared it to DNA on the second series, and it was determined that they were both the same suspect.
Detective John Weeks worked the original set of crimes and believes the timeline of attacks holds a key to IDing the offender.
We kind of came to that conclusion that the number of years that he kept disappearing would be consistent with someone being sent off to be incarcerated somewhere. 1.5 years, 6.5, 7 years. Those are consistent with prison terms.
In Ohio, DNA from felony offenders is uploaded into CODIS, a national databank of DNA profiles. If the Linden rapist has in fact been in prison, his DNA should be in the system. In a criminal investigation, however, should be, doesn't always work out.
But we weren't getting any hits.
It was kind of the situation where everybody was geared up and we were thinking, well, we're going to get a hit out of it, and we didn't.
McKee and Weeks are resigned to a strategy of wait and see. Their best chances for solving the case, slim and none. Unless the Linden area rapist decides to rape again. Detective Weeks takes a call on a sexual assault that has the look and feel of the Linden area rapist.
When you looked at the offense on paper and you compared the description of the suspects and his characteristics and his behavior and the location he had committed the attack and the method he had entered the home, you felt pretty certain that this was probably this man back again.
DNA testing confirms Weeks' suspicions. After 7 years of inactivity, the Linden rapist is back. On a Sunday morning, 20-year-old Diana Cunningham wakes up to find a man on top of her, his hands around her throat.
You know, he's telling me to shut up or he'll kill me. And he had told me that if I opened my eyes, he would slit my throat.
The man demands money, then makes it clear he is not going to leave the apartment before he rapes Diana Cunningham.
When I just kind of realized that this is going to happen, there's nothing I could do to stop it, started crying. At first, he, kept saying, "Shut up, stop crying," that kind of thing. Although later on, when I cried a little bit, he would, wipe my tears away.
The man attacks Diana for more than an hour, all the while insisting she keep her eyes shut.
There were times when I knew that he could not see my face, that I did open my eyes and try to see anything that I could.
Even as she is being raped, Diana Cunningham is collecting evidence, trying to form a mental picture of her attacker for police.
During the assault itself, I don't know what he thought I was doing, but I kind of felt around on his head, face, arms, found the scar on his arm, and that was another identifying characteristic. I got the bald spot on the back of his head.
She also engages her rapist in an almost constant stream of conversation, a ploy she hopes will save her life.
I had actually read a magazine article from another woman who had been raped in her own home, and That was one of the tactics that she had used, and I remembered that. It makes them see you as a person, just any attacker in general. If you can get them talking and open up a little bit about yourself and get them to open up a little bit if it's possible, it just helps them to see you as a human being, and it makes it harder for them to attack you, really. It makes it harder for them to hurt you.
Diana's strategy seems to work, as the rapist makes it clear he is not going to kill her. On the other hand, he is also intent on not leaving any kind of forensic evidence behind.
Basically, he said, "I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to take a shower." And he watched me wash myself to make sure that I did. And while I was in the shower, wiped my apartment for prints, actually poked his head in the bathroom to let me know that he was leaving, told me to lock the door to keep people like him out. I knew there was a house full of just college students, all guys, across the street, and so I grabbed a knife from my kitchen, went across the street, knocked on the guy's door, told him what happened. They sat with me and let me use their phone to call the police, stayed with me through the whole thing.
Columbus police converge on Diana's neighborhood and immediately recognize the work of the Linden area rapist, a man who has eluded authorities for 13 years, a man whose luck is about to run out. Rena Clarkson is a forensic scientist working for the Columbus Police Crime Lab. The first thing she does on Monday mornings is check with a woman who runs the lab's CODIS system. Each weekend, the computer processes any new entries into the databank and compares them against unknown rape profiles. On Monday, June 7th, the administrator finds a red star beside the unknown DNA profile pulled from the Linden rapes, a series of at least 19 attacks stretching over 13 years.
This is the 3138 in the convicted offender profile, matching the 3138 in the unknown sample.
For Rena Clarkson, the forensic hunt is over. The identity of the Linden rapist seemingly established to a scientific certainty.
This match was a match at all 13 loci that we look at, as well as the amylogenin, which is the sex of the sample, which is the best match that you can get.
The profile belongs to Robert Patton, a name Detective John Weeks is unfamiliar with.
He's a convicted felon. He'd been in prison in 1995. He'd entered Ohio prison systems.
Upon his release in 2001, Patton was required to provide a saliva sample for DNA testing. Unfortunately, that sample sat in a backlog for 3 years.
So it had been stockpiled somewhere for some reasons that beyond me to explain. And it had never been taken and processed and entered into that indexing system until 2004.
In the meantime, Robert Patton continued to rape women.
I believe the system failed, not advising law enforcement agencies that, yes, we're swabbing your suspects, but we're not running the test from the swabs. And that was never given to us, and that's the failure of the system.
Detectives now put their frustrations aside. With a warrant in hand, they pull Patton off the streets and sit him down for some Q&A.
I mean, I'm not going to dispute any of them, period.
Well, some of them we know are you, without a doubt.
Okay, well, probably, maybe all of them is me. I'm not even talking about the burglaries, I'm talking about the other rapes.
All right, tell us where some of these other rapes are.
That night, Patton hops in a van with detectives and leads them on a tour of a 17-year career in crime. And detectives discover that Robert Patton's penchant for rape is far beyond anything they have ever imagined.
It took us to 69 locations, and of those, 39 were the rapes and 30 of them were burglaries. And the list that we were looking at and working from primarily was 17 known rapes.
During the drive around town, Patton has graduated from terrorizing women in Columbus, Ohio, to one of this country's most prolific serial rapists, eventually being linked to at least 37 sexual assaults. Weeks deposits him in a jail cell and prepares a long list of charges.
When he walked into the courtroom, the first thing he said was, let's get this party started.
and he's got this smile on his face, and he's smirking, and the judge asks him, how do you plead? And he smiles and says, guilty as charged.
In his first court appearance, Robert Patton has not changed his story a bit. Still fully cooperative and willing to plead guilty to the Linden rapes. The next time he appears in court, however, Patton is singing a different tune.
And he said, well, I'm not going to plead to anything. I want my trial, and I want it today.
Despite Patton's confessions, Domus must now prepare for a trial. 7 months later, jury selection is underway when Patton suffers another change of heart. He pleads guilty to 58 counts of robbery and 76 counts of rape and assault, and demands the judge give him a lot of years in jail time.
At one point, he said 50 years isn't enough. So the judge, after hearing that he wanted more than 50 years, granted his request and gave him 68. I've never had a defendant ask for more time and actually get it from the judge.
On March 21st, Don Bennett responds to a call about the body of a young woman lying on top of a grave. The woman has been shot twice in the head.
Her face was bloody. Blood had run down the left side of her face and had dried. Beside the blood, dried blood on her face, it was very obvious there was a silk stocking tied very tightly around her neck, like a garrote that she'd probably been strangled with. The fact that her garments were pulled up, exposing her genitalia, would tell you that maybe there might have been an attempt at assault or rape. We didn't know at the time.
Next to the body lies a suitcase and a jumble of women's clothes.
She just obviously did not just walk in here. She was carried and put in here. Then everything she had with her was obviously put beside her and then covered up and left that way.
Bennett goes with the body to the morgue. No semen or other evidence of sexual assault is found. The victim is identified as Jane Mixer, a University of Michigan law student, reported missing the day before. In 1969, murder in Ann Arbor was a rather common commodity, with Jane Mixer, the third young woman found dead near the university.
Although she was shot, she still had the pantyhose wrapped around her neck. So, of course, that was what happened to the prior one. So, of course, that would sort of lead you to believe it was the same person.
By midsummer, the death toll stood at 7. Speculation aside, the only thing they know for sure, the investigation is fresh out of leads. Jane Mixer's murder goes cold, is packed away in the archives of the Michigan State Police, and largely forgotten until 30 years later, when the science of DNA resurrects the case and raises more questions than answers.
This envelope contains the pantyhose that were on Jane Mixer's body at the time she was found.
The victim's pantyhose are of special interest to Schroeder.
We felt quite strongly that the offender's DNA could have been embedded into the weave of that due to the fact that he had obviously had to pick her up to transport her.
Schroeder packs up the pantyhose along with several other items and sends them to the state crime lab in Lansing.
We'll use this light source in order to scan the item of evidence and see if anything stands out against the background. There were 4 areas on the nylon pantyhose from Jane Mixer. Visibly, you could see that there was a stain present in the mesh of the nylon.
Milligan believes the stains to be sweat or mucus, most likely sloughed off the killer's hands as he carried Mixer's body. Milligan isolates the stains and extracts human DNA.
3 of the stains gave a full profile. They were the same profile, so they had the same types. They indicated the presence of a male donor.
Milligan then turns to a second piece of evidence, a spot of blood found on Jane Mixer's hand. Detectives assumed the blood belonged to the victim. DNA testing, however, yields an unexpected result, a second male profile.
There was no information other than we had 2 distinct profiles of 2 different male donors associated with the items of evidence that came from Jane Mixer.
In November of 2002, the 2 profiles are loaded into the National DNA Database, and run against millions of violent offenders. A year later, one of them hits.
I got a 911 page from the lab, so I called down to the lab to find out what was going on.
The blood found on Jane Mixer's hand in 1969 has been matched to John David Rulis, a man doing time for murdering his own mother.
We thought, well, this is outstanding. We've got someone who's in prison for a violent crime. So, you know, we got all excited about that for about 20 seconds.
The excitement fades when Schroeder learns that John David Rulis was born in 1964.
It's obvious pretty quick that he was only 4 years old and 8 months at the time Jane Mixer was murdered. Surprised would be somewhat of an understatement, I think.
The Mixer case remains a mystery until 8 months later, when Detective Schroeder takes a second call from the DNA lab and identifies another suspect.
I don't know that we ever actually sat down and said, this is the guy and this is the day. This was just an opportunity for us to talk. I mean, it was the logical next step. We got to talk to the person who deposited the DNA.
Gary Leiterman is front and center in a 35-year-old cold case. Cold case detectives don't want to talk about Leiterman's neighbors. They want to know how his DNA wound up on the pantyhose of a murdered co-ed named Jane Mixer.
I may have met this person in a chance encounter, but I don't remember her specifically. I don't remember the face. I can remember having, on one or two occasions, a sexual encounter with women that I met at bars.
You know, my biggest thought at that point is Jane Mixer wasn't at a bar. She wasn't out for the night bar hopping. I mean, she had a suitcase full of clothes. She had clothes on a hanger. She was going home to tell her family about her engagement to her fiance.
The DNA, where it's at, how it is, directly puts you there. You didn't meet her in a bar.
I have nothing to do with this girl and her being killed and left here. I have nothing to do with that.
We're basically accusing this man of murdering a 23-year-old girl. We didn't get any type of the normal response that you would expect to see from someone who's being accused of a crime of that nature.
Well, you haven't told us how your DNA got there. For some reason, you don't want to talk to us about what occurred.
What this interview did for us was tell us that there is no innocent explanation for his DNA to be on her. And I feel like we covered every base we could in this interview.
You have to do what you have to do.
Gary Leiterman is arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As the state prepares for trial, however, problems arise.
It was certainly frustrating. I mean, we would have liked to have been able to present evidence to the jury to say, you know, here's why John Rulis's blood was on Jane Mixer.
Although Rulis was 4 years old at the time Jane Mixer was murdered, DNA testing shows a drop of his blood was found on the victim's hand.
Well, it was something that needed to be explained. It was something that needed to be investigated to find out if there was a problem. That was the responsible thing to do.
The first possibility, lab contamination. Hiller huddles with his forensic team.
We were pretty defensive, I'd say. You know, we are so cautious on how we process everything in the laboratory.
Jeff Nye learns that evidence from Rulis's own murder case was in the crime lab during the same month that Mixer's evidence was processed. On the surface, anyway, the potential for contamination seems to grow.
I was asked to investigate the two cases together to determine if there was any crossing of paths between the two cases in the laboratory. So basically what I would do is come to the file room and grab all of the files associated with each case.
The two cases were processed by different analysts at different workstations, nearly a month apart, making cross-contamination, in the state's opinion, highly unlikely.
They're stored on opposite sides of the property room, and all the evidence that comes in the laboratory are sealed, so there's no issue there on the fact that they came unsealed and DNA just magically crossed from one side of the room to the other.
I have never seen a case that has so much reasonable
doubt.
After 2 weeks of testimony, the case goes to the jury, which deliberates for 5 hours, then finds Leiterman guilty of murder in the first degree. Steve Keston served on the jury.
The main point of disagreement was how to handle the John Rulas blood drop, if it was his.
Despite the DNA report, Keston never believed the stain belonged to Rulas.
I personally don't think so. I think that that was Jane Mixer's blood. My personal opinion is that there may have been a mix-up in the lab, and that's how that drop of blood was associated with John Rulas.
Gary Leiterman is sentenced to a term of life without parole. No explanation, however, has ever surfaced as to how or why John Rulas's blood made its way into the Mixer crime scene.